But as you were saying about the phallus, though,
Yeah, so it's like you have to hide the fact that there's a veil. The veil
yeah,
is hiding the absence of the phallus, but it's like I think that more people than let on suspect that the phallus is insubstantial or absent, but fear that what's hiding that will be revealed.
yeah, which is the fact that what the phallus isn't a penis because the phallus is the castration, right? It's not the actual organ on the body. It's actually the castrated uh signifier, but yet it acts as it is something. But yet there are veils that try to maintain the distance of the reality of it being the hoax, that there's only a fundamental anxiety right
Here's the
there.
thing about it. I think like a lot of, and this is something that Mikey points out in his famous essay, which is that like a lot of male bonding is actually about, not in groups, but one on one. Um, Maybe not even just male bonding, but like being able to reveal to another man, it's like, oh, I don't possess the phallus, you don't.
Yeah.
And then maybe we're more comfortable with each other. We have this kind of bond in castration, but that doesn't do enough to like okay, so let's say we're peeking behind the veil,
Mm-hmm.
but to try to abolish the veil altogether is actually the more threatening thing. That's
Yes. Yeah.
really interesting.
Mm-hmm. That yeah. That is
Okay,
a
it's something I have to get my mind wrapped around though, because it's like it all goes back to like Zizek with masks.
yeah. And the thing is that in in that aspect of like kind of letting go of the phallus, in that sense you're talking about like brotherly bonding. There is the sense of where there's like um the recognition of failure, but and I think that's where he's kind of getting at with love, but not like exclusively in male bonding, but the fact that nobody has the phallus and nobody could be the phallus for someone, that nobody could give you that pure, you know, recognition, in the narcissistic sense as well, which is obviously different from the phallus. But to tie it in with phallus, the fact that in some cases, it, in I guess sexuation, that the man at least tries to have the phallus or obtain the phallus, the position of authority, the position of power, and the woman tries to be the phallus or the object of desire in some cases.
Which is why women are more successful in many cases, and like because in trying to be the phallus, it's like they see through the symbolic falsity, the symbolic like counterfeit quality of the
And
symbolic.
this is what, like, cause since it wasn't recorded, but like bringing it back to, I guess, what I was saying in like a couple of videos ago about the critique of balance notion of genital love as something of an achievement, which Lacan says a dubious achievement,
Dubious
anything.
achievement.
Yes.
Exactly.
That,
Yeah.
and it all comes back to the thing about sexuality in psychoanalysis, is that it's not gender and it's not biological essentialism. However, it is a mapping of the body for an enjoyment, but yet we're not talking about like a biological body, right? We're not talking about like a biologism. We're talking about something that is structurally situated for jouissance, right? For libidinal investment, for drives, for aims of satisfaction and how we enjoy. And that we are ultimately polymorphously perverse. That's what Freud was getting at. But Michael Allen was saying how like genital love is the goal, the achievement of this moralizing and exercising, culturally conditioning the sexuality in a way that overcomes any conflict and reconciles the Oedipus complex. But it's like, something where it's like the moral achievement is not only do you overcome that conflict, but you attain the object of desire of the genital love, which is, I guess, in a sense, mirroring from the primary love as the child with the mother's object, which is the love. right, in object relation theory. The key to that is the fact is that, like, let's look at it like if that is also a part of the phallus aspect of sexual enjoyment is genital love. Even like with the whole thing about gender theory and dismantling the patriarchy is in instances of bringing it back to the woman being the phallus and seeing the hoax of it. At the end of the day, there is that cynical distance, and that they still try to be that or display that and call it liberation, freedom, expressing their sexuality in relation to a genital love for the recognition of those who want to obtain the phallus, the simps, the incels, etc. And I'm talking about like OnlyFans motherfuckers and all these like influencers and stuff like that. But even in like the terms of like those like the thembos and the e-boys, they're still displaying genital love, even if they think that they are displaying sexual difference by being as far as their gender is non-binary, etc. There's still this aspect of performativity of genital love.
Because the thing about the phallus is that you would hope you would be signified by it, right?
Yeah.
And if you think that any one symbol can ultimately be your signified, be
Mhm.
that which signifies you ultimately, then you've fooled yourself. It's like the cop who pulls you over and says, like, do you know what this badge means? Yeah, it has a symbolic efficiency in that moment, but it doesn't actually symbolize anything having to do with any essence beyond it, right? So we know that there's no substance
Yeah.
to the phallus, but it's like, yeah, you're just reproducing another kind of phallus, the same logic, the same phallic logic when you're aiming for genital love of a different stripe or color.
Yeah.
It's like the way I see the phallus is it's like it is what and this goes in line with what Chiesa says in subjectivity and nothingness, which I think is a really interesting distinction because
Otherness, right?
Mikey was talking about the difference between like how there's a slight difference and he hasn't figured out how to articulate it between the name of the father
Mhm.
and the phallus, but the way Lorenzo Chiesa articulates it is that the difference is that the name of the father is actually the signifier of signifiers, whereas the phallus is the signifier of signifieds.
Ah, yeah.
The phallus is connected to signified, like accomplished
Yeah.
signification, which is why it's an impossibility. And
Mhm.
it's like, but lying behind all language, the entire network of it, a Chomsky bros understanding of language as acquired one by one, it's like, well, all of those individual words you get hour by hour, supposedly, as an infant, like, well, what would connect them all?
Mhm.
It's not that we live in, as Lacan understands it in Saussure, like this differential network, but it's like there's this phallus behind it that is the signifier of all signifieds, which allows all signification to take place. But
Yeah.
then there's also that element of it, like, well, what that can be gotten at, like everything that's encircles language in some sense, like can be embraced by me. And that's how I see like the idea of the phallus and why it's an impossibility.
Yeah. And like the thing is like with that definition with or that example with the Chomsky chumps is that they like think it's like an accumulation acquisition and that these words are just atomized things. It's like, well, where's the relationship between the signifier and the signified, right? Like this, it's like you haven't brought to light the arbitrary relationship between the signifier and the thing being signified. Which I mean, like we're already gonna go over like the importance of signification in this first chapter right here, but it's just like, where does the referentiality like I guess distinguish itself, right? But signification can only signify itself through signification, right?
Yeah, where does referentiality really take place, and like to what extent does a referent determine what's the signifier, the shape of it, the way it's used.
Yeah.
And you're just playing a fool's game if you go down that path, because like you just get caught up in all of the different various subversions and like undermining moments of a signifier's usage. And that's why we joke, that's why we like wit, that it's actually, it's like the spice of life in a sense.
Yeah.
It's like without it, if it was pure referentiality, then, well, that would be impossible, first of all, but it would also just like take all the enjoyment out of
Yeah.
life.
And
That's like one of the definitions, right? Is that he plays on jouissance with jouissance. I don't know. Have you ever heard that? It's like how, yeah, that's like one of the puns. I don't know what it is in French, but he turns jouissance to jouissance of like, or yeah. There's another one with meaning, enjoyment or something, like
mm,
like in playing with language and
yeah.
meaning, you derive a certain enjoyment from that.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, is the not just the enjoyment aspect, but the fact that the switching of the signifiers around to create like or just words to create metaphors, puns in particular, not just metaphors, but puns and like, you know, just playing with language like that, like opens the realm of possibilities. And that is totally different from like, again, like especially like if you look at the notion or the question concerning human nature debate with Foucault and Chomsky. And it's that for him, creativity is, and him being Chomsky, I like creativity is when there is the limits in which this has to do with understanding. Can reach it, like understanding reaches a limit, but it's that point that language allows for a leap for new possibilities of knowledge, right? And we're talking about knowledge in the classical enlightenment sense, because that's how Chomsky operates, in this enlightenment understanding of innate faculties. That's why he's always quoting like Descartes and stuff like that. But never for like things of like which are more nuanced, like enjoyment, but also doesn't really bring into question how words can signify other things besides something that's epistemological in like the crudest enlightenment sense. And he's only thinking about it in the sense of like, oh, the way like Isaac Newton discovered gravity, and that was like a creative leap.
Well, I feel like for the Chomsky conception, like I always wonder what knowledge is for Chomsky type analytic philosophy simps, and I think it really does just mean, oh, I know what words mean at
Yeah,
the end of
semantics,
the
like
day,
pure
because it's
semantics.
like it means I know what things are adequate to the words I'm using, and that like there are substances, or maybe a substance that conforms to the specific signifiers I'm using in a way that would like reflect their nature accurately, and allow me, and again there's like this sense of like mastery in that allow me to gain mastery over the object that I am dealing with in this very moment. And it's interesting to me because that
That's the key
like
word, is mastery right there.
because the undermining of mastery is what? That's comedy, that's art. This is the same reason that I feel like Plato doesn't want artists in his Republic, because what do? Well, they undermine the accepted meanings of various words and
Mm-hmm.
ideas. The image itself undermines that.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing too, is the undermining of mastery. And also when you're saying that they believe that they know words, and words either have a coherency to a meaning, which is the thing out in the world, or that it has a correspondence to things out in the world. Not like anything as far as like a signifier and signified, but like there are things out there that we could discover, right? And therefore, this is what Lacan would call the failures of scientism and discourse of this paranoid knowledge. If there's something out there that I need to know, and I'm going to put my libidinal enjoyment in finding, whether it's a
It's always
scientist,
on the horizon, right? Because that's
theory. Yeah.
like that's what Chomsky and people, that's like why people respect him. I've noticed like in YouTube comments and stuff like that, is just the fact that, oh, he's willing to sort of cordon off those areas of knowledge that are as of yet indeterminate, where we haven't discovered like the content that should fill this space, but like we have the contours of that space in mind. And like, isn't that so respectable? And it's like, well, it's always going to be like that, right? There's always going to be this margin of the as of yet unknown but to be known and very knowable
Mhm.
kind of knowledge. And it's like, well, but there's a kind, that's a kind of game, you
Yeah,
know.
especially if it's always acquiring. It's like, well, it's like you're, even if you say like until you get to like a level of coherency, but there's stuff we don't know, but we're always
Yeah.
gathering. It just becomes like an ad infinitum, like and then it begs the question. It's like, well, then how does your political, system of anarcho syndicalism like tie in? He's like, well, I keep my science and philosophy separate from my politics, but it's just like, well, then like,
Well, right, because your anarcho-syndicalism could never be instituted in time for the like knowledge to come, or
yeah,
it's like, if we don't have strong foundations, because we're still gathering every little bit of knowledge, like we're just like butterfly collectors, just like casting nets around. It's like, then we're never like, that's, we don't have time for that, do we?
yeah,
Like we have to, like, I know there's plenty wrong with Das Kapital. Like, I know it's not all accurate. It's like not about the accuracy, even though a lot of it is plenty accurate. But like, is it, people are like, well, Marx got a lot wrong. It's always that caveat, about Marx getting a lot wrong. But it's like, well, first of all, that's like just a like banal thing to point out, that
yeah,
like someone got a lot wrong. Like, no shit. Of
yeah,
course, like, he's fucking human. But like,
yeah.
it's
He's not
it's
a
like,
god.
it's not about that. It's like, if there's going to be a political project realized along the lines of something and has epistemological and ontological implications, then it's like, it needs to be realized in a somewhat idealized, at least ideal driven fashion, rather than like, well, let's wait and see and let the scientists and the experts figure out how we're.
Yeah,
So
it's just
the
like,
experts are just another form of like a managerial class. Like, let's be honest, it's just, they're just
right. Yes,
managers of information. They're managers of knowledge.
yes. Learn, gather
They're
more
palace
today and hope for
bearers.
more tomorrow. Like, we gather today and always leave the unknown now, and then hope that tomorrow the truth will come.
And then it's so funny because they become very maudlin about the state of society, but with climate change and stuff like that, the other attitude that they often assume is one of like, just, bemoaning the excesses and the like, short-sightedness and the of the human race. And it's like, well, you just switch from one to the other. It's like, well, let's
Mhm.
wait and see. But also, we had so many opportunities to turn this thing around and we didn't, kind of attitude. And
Yeah,
this
and,
sort of
and
like
it,
scolding humanity for
scolding
stuff.
you.
And it's just like, well, what the fuck, what is it?
Yeah, it's like, and then like you're in the position of the class, especially at the managerial class, where you're the one that is supposed to know everything. Your subject's supposed to know, but then instead of displaying solutions or what you're supposed to know, you cry out. Like, your performative tells you that you don't know anything, but you're transferring the blame, displacing your authority onto the other person who's supposed to take on all the blame and all the guilt. And it's just a stunt that really, at the end of the day, still instantiates the ideology of neoliberalism. and
Exactly.
and to be Althuserian, like, right, like the, like, just ideological state apparatus, but it also maintains the neoliberalism of everybody has their individual stance, right? Nobody is really, at the end of the day, in ideology, right, in the perspective of Europe, to according to Zizek, a practical solipsist, right? You're not affected by the material economic conditions, you stand outside, right? Nothing affects you but the choices, purely the choices that you make upon your own life and into the world and with others, right?
It's
It
like,
wasn't your choice that climate change is happening.
but it's like the master. I mean, on the one hand, there is this like fake, to use the French term that we are going to talk about here, manque,
Yeah.
sort of like critique of the master's discourse, but from the point of view of like a retrospectively. But then the master's discourse is your like horizon of authority, like when you're projecting forward. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you not see that the kind of imperialism inherent within your even notion of like language acquisition is the very kind of imperialism that has led to the present moment
Right.
you're talking about. And it's the same thing with like, what we,
Discovering, gathering, mastering imperialism.
it's the same thing. And then there, like someone like Chomsky, his attitude towards like political, uh just like political sins of the past is just like, again, it's like a question of gathering. Like you gather all of the facts about America intervened in this conflict, America, and it's all true and they're all valid criticisms from the point of view of like a certain like moral perspective. But it's like it's extremely moralizing, and it's still like this kind of get like just gathering of facts and information. It's like, but what specific misdeed of America is going to be the one where you're like, all right, that's it, fucking anarcho-syndicalism now. We need it. Like you could hear 100 terrible things America's done. It is endless, obviously, the encyclopedia of that. But like, what one fact is going to be the one that like is the tipping point if it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't already happened? So it's just like maybe the facts aren't enough.
Yeah, especially like, and it's the same way. It's the same form, even with like critical race theory and the liberalizing of identity politics. You could talk about like, for instance, that like the founder of gynecology was experimenting on slave women, right? Or like all these different like genocides on Native Americans. Tuskegee experiment, like the list goes on and on and on. Like, what's the one? This is ignorant of me of my geography, but the monument in Missouri, right? The St. Louis Arch or whatever it's
Oh
called.
yeah.
Yeah. How like the making of that used African American working class people to build it that lived in that area, and they were forced to vacate their homes because they destroyed a lot of their homes just to make space for that whole arch. But the same thing, it's like the gathering of facts. It's like it still doesn't move the masses, regardless of the hysteria of like Republicans, like they're teaching critical race theory. It's not history, yada yada yada, or like people defending it, saying like, no, critical race theory comes from like a lawyer who wanted to emphasize the structural oppressions of it, but then like really it's more focused on identity politics and lived experience narratives than it is systemical or systemic. And like systemic is even like a dirty word now, because it's like, okay, what do you mean by systemic? They don't talk about like base and superstructure, right? They're not talking about, if they talk about class, like it's the most cliche stratification aspect, but never something that has a dialectical overdetermined aspect with all these other overdetermined things that are happening. And overdetermination doesn't resolve, it amplifies and makes a nucleus of repression that is always the return of the repressed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And it's like this, yes, because there's like an imaginary reinforcement in there. Because you're saying, because the attitude, the liberal attitude is like, if you see yourself in your counterpart, like the your victimized counterpart, then yeah, you will be stirred, you will be moved in like a Spielbergian way to
Yeah.
change something, or in the Gandhi sense, like be that individual particular change that you want to see in the world, and then like the aggregate of all the particularities will move the needle in a certain direction. And it's like, once you start talking about base and superstructure, people get, it's funny because you take what are seemingly otherwise intelligent people who will suddenly just become blind and like just oafishly resistant to the notion that there are structures, or that like there's anything like a base, or that there are determinants outside of like what can be anthropomorphized in a sense.
Yeah.
It's so funny because they'll also be like, well, you know, human beings aren't the only creatures on the planet, and like we tend to like see ourselves as the center of the world. But it's like, all right, so if you believe that, then you can also see these determinants as in many ways impersonal. But
Yeah.
no, for
Contingent
contingent
and
and
historical.
personal and like well and material, and based on like well innumerable factors that like can't really be totally in that kind of like gathering sense all brought together. But it's like, well, I can't see a base and superstructure. Where is it? Where, tell me where it is. Like people literally respond that way. And it's like, well, this is a model for understanding.
Yeah.
Well, the whole point is not to reify it. No, like you can't see these things. They aren't real in the sense that lived experience is quote unquote real, but even lived experience isn't real in the way you think it is. That's one of the things that Lacan's pointing out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Should we get started?
Yeah, let's do this. Well, hold up. Let
Yeah.
me move ahead real quick. That was some good spitballing though. That's definitely gonna, that should be in there, like for the
Yeah,
video.
I think we should save that.
People do like the Lacanian, I guess Marxist Jacques whatever on the social sphere, but I do like when we really kind of get back in its place of the clinical.
Well, it was a good tie-in
Yeah.
to what we're about to deal with here.